lots of games, and sometimes we play the one where I hide and Daddy says, "Where are you?" And I really, and then I say, "Ah!" And Daddy didn't know where I was. And then I figure, sometimes I get stuck like this. And Daddy tickles me again, I'm not stuck anymore. And sometimes Daddy spins me around and around and around. And he says, "You're my little princess, and I love you. I like being a princess."
There's something about a little kid, you know? I'm not going to make this a big fatherly, mushy moment here or anything, but when they love you, they just let you know. My son comes in, and I always know how he feels because he wears it on his sleeve. If he's upset, he tells you instantly. If he's happy, he tells you instantly. To win my son's heart, really, it's really simple. All you got to do is give him some attention. And attention usually comes in the form of playing the chasing game. Meaning I chase him all around the house at any point and tickle him along the way. It's easy to get my son to love, to have affection. He's so expressive with his hugs, his kisses. I wake up this last morning, 2 days ago, and he comes in. Before I'd even open my eyes, boom, shoves a big old piece of string cheese in my face. And says, "Daddy, here, Daddy wants string cheese." And I'm thinking, that's the last thing I want at 7 a.m. But the fact that he had gotten one, and he loves string cheese so much, he felt like he wanted to give Daddy. Because he wanted to give Daddy what Daddy would want. I never have a doubt about how he feels about it. Because he just lets me know so clearly. You know, I compare this euphoria almost on the part of Caleb and children in general to the rush that new Christians sometimes feel when they first accept Jesus into their lives. You remember what it felt like? What it felt like when you first came and found Jesus as your personal Savior? Maybe it was during those first nights at an evangelistic meeting. Maybe it was the excitement that you felt as you learned more and more from your Bible. You learned about what God wanted to do in your life. The rush of emotions as you were dipped beneath the waters in baptism. And when you first realized that you were forgiven of everything. Maybe I'm not speaking to everybody here this morning. Maybe you're a cradle Adventist, and all you remember as far back as you can is Sabbath school. That's me, personally. I don't remember anything about not going to church, because that's where I always was from the moments I first realized. But maybe you remember a time when the verses just started to click. When they started to make sense. Maybe you remember the sincerity at the end of a week of prayer in an academy somewhere. That emotion that says there's somebody out there who wants to be in here. When all of the old stories that we've heard for so long suddenly introduced us to a personal God. Maybe that's you. But in both cases, whether you've come in the years since you were an adult or whether you were born into this, we met a real God. And He deeply affected who we are. We were on the right track. Everything seemed like it was going great. We knew who our best friend was, and God was always there when we hurt, when we were scared, or when we were stuck. God is love. And on this Valentine's Day weekend, I didn't think it was right to not say it. And I'll say it again. God is love. He wants this relationship to form with us even more intensely than the one we feel for our children, for our spouse, for our family, our friends. His love never fails, never falters, and never gets angry with our petty insults.
School now? was work, and so I called him, and he said it's okay, and he said that tonight, when I come home, he'll read my favorite story, and then he said that I'm not a cuckoo face, and I knew that. I did. And he said that I was a princess. So princesses can't be cuckoo faces, so I think I'll just be a princess instead. Yeah, that's fine.
Then Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that belonged to me. And so he divided his property between them. The man was prosperous. You can tell because he had land, he had property, enough to give a portion of it to his younger son. These sons must have had it made. You know, they lived in relative ease. There was stuff that they could have whenever they needed it. But something wasn't right. Something wasn't right with his younger son. Because it says that he asked for his share of the inheritance early. He says, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. This kind of action is way out of line. I mean, to you, our Western ears, maybe this kind of sounds rude, but in the Middle Eastern culture of the day, this was unheard of. The law of Moses says that the younger of the 2 sons would receive his portion of the inheritance after the elder, and only after the death of their father. In the socially intertwined society that we see in the Middle East, this statement is harsh in the extreme. Asking for your inheritance ahead of time, to Jesus' listeners, would have been a shock. Because their society was intensely patriarchal. The man ruled the house. A father was pretty much the boss in all things of life. He set up the marriages for his children. He chose multiple wives for himself if he so chose. And at the end of his life, it was his right to disperse his possessions to his children as he saw fit. To give you some idea of the audacity of this request, there was a researcher that had gone out and had lived in the Middle East for a lot of years, and he made it a point, whenever he was within a group of people, to ask one of them this question, and a series of questions on after. I wanted to just show you what the responses kind of went like in this interview. He's asked a villager, has anybody in your village ever requested his inheritance early? The response? Never. He says, well, could anybody ever make such a request? Impossible. If anybody ever did, what would happen to him? His father would beat him, of course. Different culture, different society. Why would he do this? The interviewer asked. Because this request means that he wants his father to die. So this isn't just a question of asking for the car keys, or asking for the wallet, or even asking for $5,000 when you need it. This is saying, I want what I deserve when you're dead, but I want it now. I want nothing to do with you. I want to take what's mine, and I hope you die and get out of my life. It's a little harsher than when we first read it here. The most surprising thing about this whole scenario, when we realize what the son was actually saying, is the response of the father. All of Jesus' listeners would have been appalled, not only at the son and his absolute hatred of his father, they would have been appalled at the response of the father to his son. It isn't normal. It's shocking. Is there any father who would allow such an insult? From the interview, we can expect that a normal head of the household would severely reprimand the son, even possibly beating him into submission to show who was really boss. But what would have completely shocked the listeners in Jesus' day is that the father is said to have divided his property between them. Without any protest, without any response, the father takes the extreme insult and hatred of his son, and he allows the son to effectively cut himself off from the family and from the father himself. This kind of response would be unheard of in that kind of culture, making Jesus' story all the more bizarre to the people who were listening to it. He had their attention. Not only is this son completely out of line, the father is a complete idiot for letting him get out of line. But the father's son doesn't realize how great the father's love really is. He's even willing to let his son reject the love that he offers. What could have caused the son to become so frustrated? Text doesn't really get into it, what happened before, or what this younger son was like, but perhaps some of the same reasons the son had are the things that we get frustrated with God about. There are times in all of our lives where we have been disappointed with God, where we question, where we said, what are you doing up there? Why aren't you helping me down here? And sometimes all we get is silence. Sometimes we wonder what is happening. Are we just talking to a ceiling? Are we talking to a wall? Sometimes it seems too hard to keep all of these rules that he seems to stipulate for each of our lives. And sometimes our prayer requests, those sincere and impassioned, go unanswered. Slowly but surely, our attention to God can get sidetracked. And we find ourselves looking at the faults and at the problems of the people around us and of the expectations that we thought were to be met. Gradually, we begin to look less at God in our lives, and we start to focus on the next best thing, or on the people and the circumstances of our own life. Things that used to be so exciting about God just aren't anymore. And then we find ourselves not even wanting the Father to fix our problems like we used to. Slowly we start to notice more of the names that people call us and of the things that they do to us, and we want to start ignoring God.
So I've been riding back to school on Jimmy's motorcycle, and I just feel so special and so alive with him. And he keeps telling me that we should just run away together, and I'm thinking about it. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm thinking about it. I mean, can you imagine, right? Like just running away, just like the world is on our feet, and I mean, just anything we want to do and anywhere we want to go. And I mean, I know it takes such good care of me. I wouldn't have to live at home with my ridiculous father breathing down my neck all the time. Your makeup's too hard. I don't like the clothes you wear. Prostitutes. I think I'm gonna leave. I know what's gonna do it for me, and this is what's gonna do it. If I have to hear one more time, I'm a princess, I can't take it anymore. I mean, in front of whole groups of my friends, they'll come up and they'll be like, have fun, princess. Oh my gosh, don't say that. And like, a princess? Like, really? I mean, who wants to be a princess in the first place? It's lame. I just want to shake him, and I just want to say, like, I used to be your princess, fine, but I'm somebody else's now. One more time. He says that one more time. I'm out.
A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property and just solitude living. You know, maybe he just wanted to see the world. Maybe he got restless. He had a perfect life with his father at home, but his life just became boring. Having left his home, he traveled far, far away from his father's influence, and he spent all of the money that he had made from his inheritance. Freedom was the goal, and it was finally rewarded. The son had nothing else to hold him back. And it says that he spent his money, in this version, on dissolute living. What does dissolute mean? It means lacking in moral restraint. Ultimately, he rejects his father. He takes his family's money as if the father were dead and strikes out on his own. At this point, the culture of the day would say that this son was completely lost. He had cut himself off from his father, his family, and his community. See, the community back then was not separated by individual families like we may have here in Western society. Each family in those days was intertwined with the ones that lived around them. I mean, these guys would grow up and they would marry the neighbor's daughter. Everybody was an aunt or an uncle or a cousin somehow. You didn't get away from the family simply by moving down the road or on the other side of town. Family was community. Community was everything. To take your inheritance before your father was dead was not only an insult to the father, but to the community as a whole. This is why the son actually had to leave with the money. You weren't going to tell your father that you wanted him dead and cut him out of your life completely, that you wanted the village to have nothing else to do in your life and still stick around. You had to leave. And so when he left and rejected everything that his life had depended on, the people around him would have cast him out himself if he hadn't gone willingly first. You know, sometimes problems in the church make us want to leave God himself. You know, really there's two ways to leave God. Physically or emotionally. Some will physically quit coming to church. Some will physically quit having anything to do with religious people at all. Will remove themselves out of the society completely. Other people stick around. For those that are mentally and emotionally absent, all of this God stuff has just become an endless cycle of rituals and hollow things. There's little left of the vitality and the strength that they had before. Or maybe we've had a perfect life. God has been good. But still, for those of us here who don't feel like leaving, or who don't emotionally disconnect, sometimes we're still just bored. And sin looks dazzling, exciting, something else to do. And we can look God in the face. And we can get tired of hearing about Him, seeing other people have relationships with Him. We're tired and we're sick, and everything that used to make us so alive can seem dead and worthless.
Ever just wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and feel like you don't even know who you are anymore? Oh, my back hurts. Well, I did run away from home. A long time ago, really. And I ran away with Jimmy. And I woke up in a hotel room one morning and he was gone. And saw it. I had nothing. I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't have any money. I mean, he said he was going to take care of me. So I had to make money. Did things that I'll never tell you about. And I thought I was going to finally scrape together enough to get a place, and I started getting sick, really sick, and I went to the screen clinic, and the doctor said, "You're pregnant." And I have a little girl, and she's so beautiful. And I work night and day to take care of her, clean people's houses. And I work in a factory at night. I sleep about 2.5 hours. I think the state's going to take her from me because we're sleeping in a box again. I can't do it. I just can't do it. I was cleaning up the other day after a birthday party. One of the kids said, "I made a silly hat. Let me show you." And I got to thinking, I was going to be somebody. I was loved by somebody once. Now I'm nothing. My little girl, she'll never know that she has a grandpa, and she doesn't have a father. She might not have a mother if I can't keep her. How did this happen to me? It's been so many years, I can't call. I can't go home. I can't do anything. Life isn't supposed to turn out this way for me. I was gonna be somebody. I used to be a princess. I was gonna be a princess. Some princess I turned out to be, huh?
When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and it began to be a need. So when he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs, he would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and nobody gave him anything. It says when he had spent everything. There will come a time when sin's excitement runs out. Jesus is trying to say that when you choose to live life life away from God, you will come up empty sooner or later. For the son, that later had finally come. Suddenly, something about the situation jumped up and smacked the son in the face and said, "Wake up!" He was jealous of the pigs. His father's servants had food to spare. Yet he, the son, the bloodline of the family, was starving. The money had been wasted, and he wasn't going to make it on his own. You know, another interesting part of the verse says that when he came to himself, when he fully realized his situation, he thought of one thing. He wasn't blaming his father or anybody else, but he thought of home. He didn't feel worthy. He didn't believe that he could return as a son, knowing how the community would respond and how his father obviously would receive him. The only thing he deserved, or would even accept, would be a servant in his father's house. Never could he be a member of the family again. Never could he, who had so blatantly rejected everything that connected him to a human family. A guy like him doesn't come home. And yet in verse 18 it says, "I will get up and I will go to my father." Sometimes, when we have left something behind, we are hesitant to believe that we can return to the place we ever came from. You know, for believers who have struggled with this back and forth, with having left God either physically or leaving God mentally, sometimes even if we want to come back, we get worried that we can't. We think we've gone too far. Maybe we worry that God is not interested in somebody like us until we make ourselves better, until we make ourselves good enough to come back. But somehow we're not really the kind of person that God wants anyway, because we're always wandering off. You know, at this point, whether we've left physically or whether we've left mentally, we feel hopeless and without options. And much like the son who rejected his father, even when we want to come back, we don't think we can. Or maybe we just don't know how. Maybe we don't feel like we can just jump in again like everything's normal. Verse 20 says, he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son and he threw his arms around him and kissed him. There's greater implications going on in this verse. Again, the culture of the day. Remember, the community would have rejected this kid. They would have forcefully kicked him out of town, and if he ever showed his face again, they would have mobbed him. Because he was no longer a part. And so when we see this verse here, the first thing it says is, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. It sounds like that father was out there waiting. He was standing on the side of the road, looking, waiting for the day when his son would crest the horizon. And don't think that the people in his village didn't notice this. A father who has been completely ridiculed and slandered and run into the ground by his son, standing out there day after day, pining away for this same son. It's shameful. It's pathetic. And the village would have looked and seen exactly what this guy was like, and they would have laughed. The shame of waiting shows us that this father took the shame on himself. The next thing we see is the father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran to him. do you think he was running to get ahead of? The village, if you read it in that culture's context, the people would have gotten to the son before the father did if he didn't run ahead. And so the father not only took the shame to stand there every day and wait, but he ran ahead to make sure nobody got there before him. He ran that gauntlet to make sure that the son would be safe. Seeing him from afar off, filled with compassion, he ran to him to protect his son. And then it doesn't finish there. Before the son can even gather up the strength to get an apology out and to ask to be a servant in the house, the father grabs him and says, "Bring out the fatted calf. Bring out the clothes. Bring out the wine. Start a party. This is my son who has returned." And before anybody could say anything else, he was back. This would have been shocking. Jesus is trying to tell us that God's love is shocking. Is there hope? The prodigal son returns. He can't even finish his speech before the father is hugging him and crying. And before a week he was even home, the father was covering the distance between them. We don't have to reach a certain point within ourselves before God is accepting us back. He accepts us as ourselves. And then he brings us back. bow your head with me. Jesus, your love is crazy. But we here today are people who need crazy love. I just want to pray that you make us each realize today and for the rest of our lives how much you want us back. Thank you for giving us hope. In Jesus' name.